Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
Friday. And all of today's guests, including Thomas Drance, standing by, brought to you by the Bayside Oceanfront Resort. Looking for a midweek escape close to home, BC residents save 15% on weekday stays at the Bayside Oceanfront Resort in Parksville. Relax by the ocean, enjoy great dining, and unwind with island hospitality. Book now at Bayside-ResortParksville.com. Canucks hosting Anaheim on Saturday as the regular season, winds down. They've lost 3 straight, including that 5-0 defeat at the hands of Seattle on Wednesday. Thomas Drance from The Athletic here to talk about it. How are you, sir?
Doing well, gentlemen. How are you guys?
Very well. What do you think Rick Tocchet and company are looking for from their players during these final 7 games, other than a miracle playoff berth?
Yeah, look, I think more than anything, just some professionalism, work rate, keep it sort of consistent. You know, I think more than anything, that's what this team needs to do to finish out the year, especially because, let's be honest, gentlemen, if they hadn't had some genuinely mystifying efforts, far too many in November, December, and January, we're probably not having this conversation, right? If this team had been a max effort team consistently throughout the year, I think they have a better fate. They couldn't manage it in the meat of the season. We know that there were complicated reasons for it, and here we are. So I think more than anything, what I want to see is just some work. Like I just want to see this team sort of get back to that, I guess what they call standard, right? Last year, that sort of became the identity of this team. And honestly, that I think we've seen for much of the last month, you know, even if they've had some rough performances on the way, like that game against Seattle on Wednesday, I know the scoreline is lopsided, but I didn't feel like that was the sort of like a low effort performance. I just think the Canucks didn't have enough speed at center to deal with what Seattle was able to generate off the rush. Maybe there was a bit of deflation after the Burakovsky 4-0 goal, but like even in the third period, they came out and sort of dictated and you know, pushed, right? Like that I thought was a relatively solid performance. That I want to see performances like that more than the results. I just want to see this team, you know, play with some of that pride, play with some of that respect that they put in the jersey last season, which I think they've shown in spurts this year, but far too inconsistently.
Hey, Thomas, I find it fascinating that the head coach has no contract, and, you know, what do we got? 7 games to go. Is this going to linger for weeks, or do you think we should get an answer on Tocchet's future shortly after the season's over?
Yeah, I think it would behoove the team to get it
Good
figured
word.
out pretty
Good
quick.
word.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Behoove. I'm glad you repeated it. Behoove. Yeah. Behoove. Isn't that a defenseman on St. Louis?
Yeah.
Anyway,
It's in the AHL right now.
it would be. Look, you need clarity. We know how these situations can not just drag on, Rick, right? But
yeah.
I mean, what's the phrase you like to use, right? The Canucks have invited the national hockey media to a barbecue in their backyard, right?
Oh, they did.
They did. I know. Well, they regularly do. And I think we don't want to see another Canucks cookout over this, right? Yeah. I mean, clarity one way or another is important. You know, the team has made it clear to Elliot Friedman this week, matching my reporting the week prior, that, you know, they intend to enforce their rights here. They view Rick Tocchet as their coach. He's not an unrestricted free agent. They want to keep him. They want to keep him on an extension. You know, in terms of Rick Tocchet, like, do we know he wants to stay? Do we know that he wants to feel more comfortable, you know, before making that commitment, just based on what direction the club is going to do and what the plan looks like to sort of pick up the pieces and get back to contending beyond this season? You know, I know fans are down on him because the results this season haven't gone well. You know, the team has not played an aesthetically pleasing style of hockey and hasn't had success, and that's tough, I think, for people to swallow. But I watched this team play, and, you know, I think they largely are better prepared and well structured and solid defensively. I think Tocchet's done a pretty good job overall. When you look at his sort of the balance of work that he's done in his 2.5 seasons in Vancouver, he's the second winningest head coach in Canucks history by point percentage behind only Alain Vigneault. And I think he'd improve an awful lot of situations if he were to land elsewhere with one of the other teams around the NHL. I think the Canucks would be hard-pressed to replace him. So, you hope that this gets sorted out and that it's relatively drama-free. This team invested a lot in bringing Tocchet in. They took a lot of bullets, right? Rutherford and Alvin did to land their guy with the way that the Boudreau situation was handled. Their guy, Tocchet, has been a good fit, led the team to one of the most successful seasons in franchise history, authored one of the great individual season turnarounds defensively that we've seen in recent NHL history. So, that this seems like a no-brainer. Just get it done once the season ends, have those conversations, and hopefully by mid-May, there's no drama around this situation.
Hey, what's going on with Tom Willander? You mentioned they're fighting over the A bonuses. I mean, if this guy goes back to school, I don't think that's a good thing, Thomas.
No, well, you definitely don't want college players to spend any more time than they need to at the college ranks, especially given the way that their leverage enhances over time. Willander has nothing else to prove in the NCAA. This guy's pro-ready. I think this guy could step into an NHL lineup and play third pair minutes, no problem. I think he'd be good at the NHL level right off the hop. I think there's a chance that he could be, a real shot in the arm, playing shutdown minutes in the top four, maybe even on the top pair for Abbotsford, who just clinched their playoff spot, right? As they make sort of a hopeful run through the Calder Cup playoffs under Manny Malhotra here. So, yeah, no, you want him to come out. And, my guess is that he will. The Canucks have been, in the Rutherford and Alvin era, pretty strict about the Schedule A and B bonuses they hand out. Now, that makes sense when you're operating in LTI, right? Because those bonuses can count against your cap as an overage in subsequent seasons if you're not tolling daily space. But this team's out of LTI now, right? They spent to make the Tucker Pullman trade. And as a result, should have the flexibility to bend a little bit, right? To at least pay market rate. I mean, 11th overall picks, they often get full Schedule A's or, a good portion of it. Those, of course, are automatic bonuses for those of your listeners for whom this is too inside baseball, right? Those are automatic bonuses tied to player performance. And, yeah, I mean, industry rate or max bonuses for an NCAA player wouldn't be outside the realm of what you'd expect. And I'd just be surprised more than anything, Rick, if that was something that actually caused real complications in these contract talks after Villander's BU season ends. So, yeah, I suspect this will get done and Villander will join the American League team. And I think the club is counting on him to play a major role for the Canucks at the NHL level next season. All of that should, I think, supersede, any elbows being thrown really before negotiations get down to brass tacks with BU headed to the Frozen Four.
Thomas, I know you wrote about this, so I'll ask you about this subject. Jared McCann, 3 assists the other night in the 5-0 Seattle win over Vancouver. The Kraken have been around for 4 seasons. McCann has led them in points every single season. Looks like he's going to be their point leader again this season. What goes through your mind when you watch former Canuck first-rounder Jared McCann play hockey?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I worked with him in Florida, right? So I'm always rooting for Jared McCann, like him personally. And what are you shaking your head at, Dolly?
Well, just because you worked in Florida with him. Come on.
I'm just saying there's a relationship there beyond one that I'd have with an average player who I didn't work with, right?
Well,
that's all I'm saying.
That brings up the point that the Panthers gave up on him too.
Yeah, and Toronto did too.
Pittsburgh?
Well, yeah, I would say Toronto acquired him to
the Kraken draft,
fix their losses.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say Toronto gave up on him by any means. Pittsburgh did, the Brian Burke regime, right?
Yeah.
Florida did, the Dale Talon regime. Vancouver did, the Jim Benning regime. You want to trust the judgment of those front offices, Rick? I don't know, man. I don't know. I'd say that says more about those gentlemen than it does about McCann. Look, I was just sort of after McCann had that game and sort of, fed the Canucks their lunch in a game that ended all realistic opportunity for this team to make the playoffs. I was just thinking, like, man, it is wild that this guy, maybe one of the most potent symbols of this organization's 15-year love of short-term thinking, is sort of the guy who's performing like this at this moment. And then I kind of started looking at the stats, and I was just like, oh my God, the only three players, that the Canucks have had who have outscored Jared McCann across the 9 years since he was dealt are Quinn Hughes, Brock Besser, and Elias Pettersson, right? The amount of points, like he has 370-ish points, since he's in the NHL since the Canucks dealt him. The only guys who the Canucks have had that have outscored him are Miller, Hughes, Besser, and Pettersson, right? It's just like, it's just mind-blowing. And that the sort of cost of that short-term thinking, McCann and multiple draft picks for a depth defenseman, just kind of lingers to this day. And so, as I was considering it and considering sort of where the Canucks are at, and the fact that, from the perspective of where do we go next, I do think we're looking at another all-in offseason. And I don't think that that's uncalled for, right? The stakes of getting back to contention when you've got a player as transcendent as Quinn Hughes, I think that matters enough that this club can't be considering doing what they should have done most of the off seasons in the last 14 years and taking a calculated step back to try and actually contend for a Stanley Cup as opposed to just making the playoffs.
Yep.
They can't do that now, right? Like, that's not where they're positioned. That's not a realistic path forward. This team needs to get back to contending. This team needs to make itself an appealing landing spot for one of the best players in hockey. And so, just as I was going through that, it's like, since the NHL trade deadline, right? Since the NHL trade deadline, the Canucks have played 14 games. We all know that they decided not to sell. They've won 4 of those 14 games in regulation, right? And so it's not that the club should be rebuilding at this point. They can't afford that. Right? I was right 2 years ago. I'm not right now, right? Like, that this is not a moment to rebuild. This is a moment, though, I think, where, like, even at the deadline, like, even at the margins, this club frittered away opportunities to position themselves better for a summer that looks to be very high stakes, right? This team is going to have cap space, but it's only about 14-ish million in cap space. It's not top 10 among NHL teams. It's not top 20. Right? They'll have cap space, but they don't have purchasing power relative to their rivals around the league. They need 2 or 3 impact forwards, depending on what happens with Pius Suter and Brock Besser here. And so to not have taken advantage of that opportunity, at the deadline to sort of just add weapons, right? Because this team's going to need to pull a rabbit out of a hat in terms of identifying high-end forward talent, impact forward talent, at least one top 6 center, and then maybe 2 more forwards that can make a real difference for this team, over the course of the summer, if they're going to get back to where they want to be next year. It's a tall order. And when you sort of look at all their holdings, short of dipping into, for example, their promising collection of young players, which this management group has pretty impressively put together, Belander, Elias Pettersson, Lekaramaki, even Atu Ratu's impressed me, of course, over the last few weeks. Like, if you're not dipping into those sort of 4 players, I mean, how are you landing? How are you winning the bidding for one of these top UFAs or for one of the top trade targets or what have you? It's going to require an incredible lift, right? It's going to require something somewhat implausible for management to do it. They've done a pretty good job shopping in the bargain bin in multiple seasons, right? Pius Suter, Kiefer Sherwood, and company. But they're going to have to do that again, and they're going to have to do it on a scale, that they haven't been asked to in the past, frankly, right? They've done it with, like, Hronek on defense, but they haven't had to do it with forwards. That was what went through my head as I watched Jared McCann and the Seattle Kraken sort of pump the Canucks on Wednesday.
It behooves us to end this interview.
Yeah, very much so. Behooves.
Thanks for that.
Well, thanks, boys.
Thanks, Thomas. Appreciate it.
Adios.